Welcome back to Planet Soul. I'm Heather Renae Horton, Indigo Life Designs, the Fishman, and now, William Stickevers. Hello, sir.
Hello, Heather, and happy 4th of July.
Yeah, indeed, especially with the current 2014 hoopla.
Yes. So, I believe we're going to talk about the global paradigm shift that's underway today.
Yeah, let's dive right into it. I prepped our listeners in the first half, and I think there's enough people that pay attention to both you and I on Facebook, and I've engaged with you on those, hence the invitation to the show, and they know what's going on, so let's hear it.
Well, good. Well, part of the global paradigm shift that's been underway since 2010, it's not just a 2014 thing. People are becoming aware of it, but it's really been in place since the Cardinal T-Square in late July, early August of 2010. And what we're seeing now is a global currency reset where the U.S. dollar, along with U.S. Treasury bank reserve structure, will begin to rapidly collapse, as it's doing so now, although it's not in the mainstream news, as China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, India, and South Africa begin to bypass the dollar and create a bilateral trade system. And major OPEC nations begin to refuse to sell oil exclusively in dollar terms. I'll explain that in a second. So the global reset will essentially be a return to the gold standard. And therefore we can expect gold prices, which have been suppressed by the central bank since 2008 financial meltdown, to begin to move upward to 2,000 ounces or more, 2,000 an ounce starting in the second half of 2014, shooting into 3,000, 4,000 as we move to 2015, 2016. Now, the bottom line is, in order for nations to trade with each other or to purchase oil from OPEC or from Russia until a few months ago, they had to use U.S. dollars. They had to take their own currency and then swap their currency into certain U.S. dollar treasury swap mechanisms where they could then make purchases of oil or commence trade settlement with their neighboring nation. Now what's happened is most of the countries are shifting away rapidly since the Ukrainian crisis, where now China is now providing yuan swap mechanisms where countries can take their money, put it into a local bank where there is a yuan swap mechanism in one of the major cities, and they could buy oil or they could trade with each other without using U.S. dollars. Now, why is that important? Because there are more U.S. dollars overseas being traded than there are U.S. dollars that are being utilized here in the States. So what that means is we can continue to print money, never pay our debt, never be financially accountable, continue to recapitalize the banks. Those banks in turn keep recapitalizing the stock market, even though there is no basis of real growth. And we can put on the facade that we're still a major financial power. However, when those nations, which are doing so now, no longer need our dollars anymore in order to commence international trade, because they have these yuan swap mechanisms, they can buy oil cheaper from Russia than they can from Saudi Arabia or from the OPEC nations. Those nations will begin to dump their treasury bond bank reserves, stop utilizing dollars. Dollars will start pouring back into the United States, and we will see the begin of a deflation followed by an inflation. So we're going to have both deflation as the economy continues to slow, and inflation as the U.S. dollar continues to drop in its purchasing power. And that is the big global paradigm shift that's underway. And there's going to be all sorts of ramifications. You're going to see social unrest, out of control unemployment, but more importantly, underemployment. You're going to see revolutions spreading, and there are revolutions spreading all throughout the world. I think there's more. I think I listed over 61 revolutions since 2010, and large-scale protests. So you're going to see a collapse of the petrodollar, where even Saudi Arabia is going to begin dumping the exclusive use of U.S. dollars to trade oil. So you're going to see the petrodollar, which was basically back in 1973, Nixon took the U.S. dollar off of the gold standard and put it onto the oil standard, meaning all dollars were based on how much one barrel of oil could be purchased. So based on that, everything was based on You had to use U.S. dollar to buy oil. OPEC at the time produced majority of the world's oil. That has now changed, and now OPEC is getting with the program and realizing that the dollar is not really backed by anything. It's backed by debt. The U.S. is losing its power status as a major superpower, both financially and economically. And it's even losing its political prowess overseas. And most Americans are completely clueless about all these things that are now taking place.
Whew, okay.
Did I explain that properly? Was that?
Yeah, it's just so much. So I had first questions, but we're gonna roll into like question 4 and 5 already. Why are we not seeing the full-blown unrest in the U.S. yet?
Well, you have. I mean, let's just face it. You have right now, as of this week, 92 million people are out of work and have given up looking for a job, all right, since the 2008 crisis. 92 million people. That is documented by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that recently came out. Also, we have underemployment, which is the real big issue, where people who are looking for full-time work or who are making a six-figure salary prior to 2008 no longer can get either that full-time work or making 50% or less what they were making since the crash. That comprises now of 25% of the workforce. 25%.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Right, that's a lot. Let's put also into perspective the fact that 47% of U.S. residents are not contributing in taxes. They are basically getting compensation from the state and local government. All right, so you have a large segment of the population that doesn't even contribute to the society, and of the 50% or the 51 or 52% that actually does contribute in terms of tax revenues, you only have 25% of that is being compromised and is continuing to deleverage. The regular middle class, which is getting full-time incomes, their purchasing power is being diminished dramatically because the inflation index by the government does not include food and fuel and the total cost of ownership of running a household. It's taken that and extracted it out of the benchmark for calculating inflation. So if you use the same statistical methods that they used in 1980 to calculate inflation, all right, during the Jimmy Carter years, you would see that inflation is exceeding 9%. It's around 10.2%. So that means every year the purchasing power keeps dropping dramatically. And what does that mean? That means like back in 2010, if you were making $50 an hour, you would have to make something like $62 an hour today in order to have the same purchasing power you had in 2010. And we know that salaries haven't been increasing, incomes haven't been increasing. Middle-class families are deleveraging much more so because they're not seeing the price of the homes move that much. I mean, there's a lot of issues that are going on. Also, the problem is you have a majority of the Generation Y still living at home. The Generation Y is living at home. And you also have people who are now the baby boomers who are trying to retire, and they can't. They're either moving in with their Generation Y children, or they're basically maintaining this, they're still continuing to work, which is really making it much more difficult for the millennials to enter the workforce. So you see a lot of people with master's degrees in their 20s living at home. You see a lot of people in their late 60s deciding that they cannot retire because their asset base was basically destroyed, and their pensions are under tremendous stress, and they're unsure that they're going to have a retirement. So the retirement they were promised, the baby boomers in particular, they're realizing now that their pensions are now vulnerable. Their asset base has been diminished. The value of their homes has gone down dramatically. So a lot of their options are curtailed. So the workforce is stagnant. There's very little growth. There's no capital formation going on in this country at the level that needs for a population that's moving to 400 million. You have illegal immigration that's out of control. That's taking more and more. That illegal immigration is taking a part of the workforce out away from entry-level positions for Americans. So we have a growing set of systemic issues that are now converging into a larger scale crisis, and this is it's all a result of this reset that's now in play.
Okay, right. So there's the 3D economic, financial, and global crisis that it is undeniable. So can you give us the astrological connection that I mean you're somebody that's been saying this the whole time for years. I've made mention of it as well. I know Theodore White has, and we tend to be met with a lot of opposition by others within our line of work. However, I would say with a financial background that I have and that you have, we see things that maybe other people that study within astrology may not notice because it's not part of their 3D experience from being in finance. What can you connect for the listeners there?
Yeah, I basically think that what we're seeing is a play out of an X event, and let me explain what that is. Since the 5th century onward, there's always been a consistent pattern of X events of international significance. Okay? And basically, they have potent long-term global significance that often occur during the second decade at the start of each century. Many of these game-changing historical events have often occurred in the middle part of that second decade and correlated with the rise and fall of empires, large-scale military invasions, revolts, social revolutions, political power struggles, and unexpected outcomes in military campaigns, religious conflicts, economic turmoil, major outbreaks of world wars, to name a few. And let's just go back in time for a little bit here. If you just go back 100 years, all right, with 2014 now, 1914, what do you have? You have World War I. Let's go back another 100 years. You have the Napoleonic invasion of Europe and Russia. You have the War of 1812, where America declared war on Great Britain and Canada, and you have a whole set of other events that were going on worldwide at that time. Let's go back. We can go back a little bit further here. If you go back, let's say, back to 1618, you had the 30-Year War in Europe, which was one of the most devastating wars and religious conflicts in Europe. If you go back to 1517, you have the High Renaissance, where Martin Luther begins his Protestant Reformation, which basically took the Catholic Church, which was the only church and basically the global governance structure of Europe, and broke it up into hundreds of institutions and began the formation of nation states. If you go back, if you go back 100 years behind that, you have a major military upset between the English and French war that occurred in 1415. If you go back 100 years before that, you see this Scotland independence from England. 100 years before that, the Magna Carta. 100 years before that, the Knights Templar were founded in 1119. 100 years before that, you see the Viking invasion of England, where the Vikings overtook all of England and Ireland in one climactic battle. Then you see the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire back in 912. So I'm going back 100 years. You can go all the way back 100 years to the beginning of the 5th century, where the Roman Empire, Rome, was sacked by the Visigoths, and it was the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. So what we're seeing today in 2014, I believe, with the emergence of the Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto T-square alignment that's been in effect since March and culminating into late May, and it's still in effect now, is the emergence of a new X event. All right? And where we're going to see the shakeup of the United States, which up to this point has been the world's lone military, technological, and economic superpower. And that is going to be shaken up. That status, its hegemony over all other nations. We're going to see a major unexpected geopolitical development. And that is going to force this country and the leadership of this country to make some bold make or break decisions that will have a major impact, along with profound consequences for not only for the American people, for many nations throughout the world. And, this culmination, if you look at the fact that the Uranus-Pluto, since it really began to emerge in early 2007, which was the onset of the economic crisis, it culminates in peaks around now, into the summer and into the early fall of this year. So you're also going to see a major shakeup between generational power and the generational establishment, which is what Theodore White writes so eloquently about, where the values and principles of one generation and the outdated methodologies and ideologies clash with the newer generation. All right, so you're going to see a lot of movement in favor of fresh reforms and sometimes what we would call radical evolution into an emerging New World era. And it's going to happen here in the United States. What a lot of astrologers who are very provincial, narrow-minded, and partisan in their viewpoints, who always believe the Jeb Bush or the Hillary Clinton is the only two solutions, are going to become very antiquated when, in terms of their worldview, it's going to become very apparent that their worldview is antiquated when we see more and more of the social radical youth defiance that will come out now that the millennials are chronically unemployed. There is no hope for them, where the baby boomers can no longer retire because the pension plans are collapsing all over the country now, where you're seeing the municipal defaults happening. So you're going to see the boomers, you're going to see the millennials, you'll see the Generation X now who are in a position of power having to make, sort of mediate this process. So it's all really going to really take off. And I really think the underpinning has to do with the Uranus and Pluto alignments that have been in play. And that very much correlates with the Barbeau Planetary Cyclic Index, which continues its decline. It started its decline in April of 2014 until it reaches its baseline where it hits bottom in 2020, 2022 during the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and remains there until 2024. So, generally, collective change is gradual. It allows time for the masses to integrate some new archetypal energies that are unfolding, all right? But sometimes in history, during X-events periods in history, it's quick, it's explosive, and the Grand Cardinal Cross that just has been in play represents not only the buildup that we've been seeing since 2007, but the sudden dramatic upheaval and major reversal of power that signify a crucial tipping point. And that tipping point happened in May for civilization, where unsustainable and untenable systems of government throughout the globe, including the United States, all right, will be shaken to the core and begin to break down.